If you were asked to conjure up a quintessential English scene, what would it look like? And what would it taste like? But what would it sound like? This is Choral Evensong. It's a special evening service of music and prayer at the very heart of the Church of England.
What I'm listening to now is exactly what you'd have heard when Evensong was in its infancy in the 16th century.
Our country's greatest composers, from Ralph Vaughan Williams to Benjamin Britten, have all written music for Evensong, the words of which have remained unchanged for nearly 500 years. And it was here, where I work, at Hampton Court Palace, where this tradition was nurtured.
It sounds like angels singing, doesn't it? But behind the music, all kinds of nasty things are hidden. There's bloodshed, and martyrdom, and ruthless political manoeuvring.
As Henry VIII's Reformation tore up the Catholic faith England had been ruled by for 1,000 years, he replaced it with a new national church. And the music at the heart of worship became a battleground. Fought over not just by Henry, but by his successors Edward and Mary, who drove England to even further extremes, leaving their sister Elizabeth I to decide the religious fate of a bitterly divided country. Elizabeth had to fight to keep church music alive at a time when its very existence hung in the balance. This is Elizabeth I's Evensong. This music, written for evensong services in the 1590s, was the pinnacle of English church music under Elizabeth I. But in order for this choral tradition to emerge, something had to die, burned in the fires of Henry VIII's Reformation that transformed English religion and what was heard in churches forever. In the 1520s, before his Reformation and the birth of Elizabeth, Henry ruled over a country where there was a rival authority to his own. Henry's England was part of a Catholic church more than 1,000 years old. It operated under its own rules, set by the Pope hundreds of miles away. The church controlled everything: who you could marry, how you lived your life, and whether you were heading for heaven or hell. In this church, music was central to the worshipping that went on, but not the sort of music that you could join in with. It was pretty much the opposite to a sing-along. Prayers were chanted in Latin, which most people didn't understand. In order to sing in church, you had to be able to read Latin prayer books. So, only educated monks or nuns could chant prayers. Your job as a parishioner then, in this Catholic church, was to sit quietly while the worshipping was done for you. And at the heart of this worship was a form of sung prayer known as plain chant.
Plain chant is monophonic sacred song. That means it has a single line of melody, which everybody sings, and it's music directed not to people, but to God. So it's the normal way that you would sing in church in the Middle Ages.
What's this enormous book here?
This contains, as you can see here, the Psalms. These are the Psalms for Saturday throughout the year, but it also has a great deal of other music which would serve for every day of the church's year. This is a little formula. You first sing this bit, and then the formula at the end tells you what the tune for the psalm that follows or precedes might be. So in fact, you have a great amount of text, and all of this can be sung according to just that little formula.
But this plain chant was just about to be caught up in the most catastrophic changes. Henry was sick of the Pope, who was refusing to grant him a divorce from his Catholic wife, Catherine of Aragon. So Henry dramatically split England from the Church of Rome and seized back the lands and properties the Pope had controlled. Between 1536 and 1541, over 800 monasteries were suppressed, and across the country, the sound of plain chant was silenced forever. This is a really spine-tingling document. It's amazing. It's an eyewitness account by one of the monks who was there at the dissolution of the monastery of Evesham. It happened in 1539 on the 30th day of January at evensong time. He says that the monks were in the choir, and he even says what verse they got to when the king's commissioners came in and would not suffer them to make an end. So that was the very moment that this particular monastery got dissolved, came to an end. Through his dissolution, Henry had inadvertently silenced plain chant, but there was another type of music, heard in the very poshest Catholic churches, that he was most reluctant to get rid of. It was reserved for the ears of the wealthy and the powerful. It could only be heard in the grandest churches in the land. It involved a lot of different voices singing different things, but at the same time, polyphony. To hear it, you'd have to come to a cathedral like this one. The prospect of losing this music presented a big problem for Henry, because polyphony, sung in Latin, was the highest way to praise God, and Henry loved it. The undisputed master of polyphonic composition was John Tavener. In his polyphony, Tavener took Latin plain chant and embellished it to the ultimate degree. His music required expert choirs and a great many voices. It could only be performed by the best, like Henry VIII's own private choir, the Chapel Royal, who travelled with him and sang for him in all his royal palaces. My colleague, Carl Jackson, is the current Director of Music at Hampton Court's Chapel Royal, where Taverner's music is still testing singers today.
So, Carl, we know what plain chant is. Can you and your choir explain polyphony to me?
Polyphony, that literally means many voices. So in the piece which the choir are going to sing, Dum Transiset by John Taverner, that does have a polyphonic texture, but it has the added advantage that there is a plain chant or plain song backbone which supports the music. It's there invisibly. Let's hear the plain chant starting from Sabbatum. So I think this is the baritone, the second voice from the bottom. And there's an F, I think, so let's try the backbone. Sa.
So that's like the bottom of a wall, and you're going to, well, Taverner is going to build on that now.
Well, you say the bottom of the board. In fact, it is really a backbone, so it is in the centre of the texture, or almost the centre, because we have the part beneath it. We've got the basses.
Ooh, unleash your basses, if you would. Okay, who comes in next?
And as we can see, the tenors come in next, and their part is a little more elaborate, faster note values, a little more interest.
Always show-offs, those tenors. And who's going to come in next?
The boys are going to come in next, the highest part of this musical texture. In fact, the boys start at the same time as the basses start. So we hear a part, the highest part and the lowest part start together with that musical backbone going on at the same time.
Now, what about the words, then? What are they singing? I can't really distinguish it, but then I'm not supposed to, am I?
Well, the word which they're singing is Sabbatum, which means the Sabbath. And
It took them an awfully long time to sing that one word.
it did. There were a lot of notes for 1, 2, 3 syllables. So this is what we call melismatic, where you have one particular syllable with lots of notes to it, the opposite of syllabic.
Like Lucy.
Precisely.
Despite instigating his radical reformation, Henry was a walking contradiction. He actually rather liked the Catholic Church, especially its rich polyphony. In his heart, Henry loved music. He even played well himself, a passion shared by his young daughter Elizabeth. But this double standard couldn't last, as Henry had created an opening for ardent religious reformers. Because of the Reformation, they felt they had the right to criticise polyphony. It was decadent, and ostentatious, emblematic of everything wrong with the corrupt Catholic Church.
Religious music was a real flashpoint for religious arguments. Here's the scholar Erasmus, writing as early as 1519. Modern church music, he says, is so constructed that the congregation can't hear one distinct word. The choristers themselves don't understand what they're singing. Two religious reformers, like Thomas Cranmer, Henry VIII's super-zealous Archbishop of Canterbury, the complexity of the Catholic Church as a whole was a bad thing. He thought it got in the way of people worshipping properly. And music was the worst offender of all.
In a letter to the king, Archbishop Cranmer advised Henry that religious music should not be full of notes, but, as near as may be, for every syllable a note, so that it may be sung distinctly and devoutly. This was a big ask, a full scaling back of the melismatic polyphony Henry adored.
Gloria in excelsis Deo.
But Henry didn't really want to kill the beauty of sung Latin Mass. So in 1543, he summoned England's finest Catholic composer, Thomas Tallis, into his Chapel Royal choir to write religious music specifically for the king's private chapel. In this piece, you can hear that Tallis is trying something new. It's much plainer. The words are clearly audible. But this was a compromise. It's still recognisably music for an old-style mass, and it's sung in Latin. In order to transform this music into something truly unique for Henry's new English church, something monumental would have to happen. And ironically, it was Henry himself who was the catalyst for this enormous change. In the summer of 1544, an 11-year-old Elizabeth watched on as her father prepared for battle. Henry was going to war, and he needed God on his side. So he demanded a great ceremony. He wanted his people to pray for him, and he didn't want them praying in a language they didn't understand. One day in May 1544, a procession was snaking its way around St. Paul's Cathedral. They were chanting out loud prayers for King Henry VIII. Now, that wasn't that unusual, but what was unusual was the fact that the prayers were in English. Thomas Cranmer explained to the king that he'd written them in the vulgar tongue with the purpose of stirring the people to greater devotion. Now, this really was unprecedented. It was the first time that English people had sung Christian prayers in their own language. And in fact, not even that was the most exciting thing to happen on this day, because inside the cathedral, there was going to be a special performance of a religious song whose words had a really unexpected author. For years, this music has been kept in an archive here at the University of Oxford, the source of its mysterious English lyrics unknown. It's thanks to the detective work of Dr. David Skinner that the author has been identified all these years later.
Where has this been for the last 500 years to get into such a state?
Well, I mean, during the renovation work here at Corpus Christi, Oxford, these were discovered behind plasterwork in 1978, believe it or not, and they survived enough that you can actually see the notation and read the words. And nearly immediately, a musicologist identified the music as coming from Thomas Tallis, and in particular his grand six-part antiphon Gaude Gloriosa, but with English words, and English words that could not be identified.
Who wrote the words then? This is your big discovery.
This was my big discovery. I turned to re-editing Tallis's works for publication, turned to this text once again, and found that they are in fact by Queen Catherine Parr, Henry VIII's last and sixth wife.
That's amazing.
It is amazing. Normally, when you find a Latin work that's had its Latin replaced with English words, the text would be rather devotional in nature or biblical. This is far from that. You look at the words. For they are traitors and rebels against me. Let thy power be brought to naught, and wickedness light upon their own head. Stand up, O Lord, and punish these naughty people, for they are traitors and rebels against me.
Traitors and rebels against
These
me.
are fighting words, and that's what really brought me to the years 1544, 1545, because this was Henry's war years. He was constantly at war, but in this particular year, he was at war with both the Scots and the French, and himself personally was to go to war that summer, leaving Catherine regent.
It's pretty amazing that here we've got a 16th century woman writing the words, telling everybody what to do, being the mouthpiece of power. What do you think it was like for her stepdaughter, the Princess Elizabeth?
It would have been an extraordinary thing for her to witness. And you can imagine that, that this whole idea of theatre, ceremony, propaganda really fed into her own career as queen and as a great diplomat.
Princess Elizabeth can't have failed to notice that her stepmother was a really impressive woman. I think that Catherine Parr was an important role model for the young Elizabeth. Here she was, telling the most powerful men in the land what they ought to do. And subliminally, with her music, she was telling the whole English people what they ought to feel.
Young Elizabeth paid close attention to her stepmother. In a letter to Catherine, she wrote, "I am not only bound to serve you, but also to revere you with daughterly love." And Catherine reciprocated, making sure that Elizabeth received a rigorous education from the finest Protestant tutors. Catherine ensured that Elizabeth also had an exceptional musical education, and music was something they both loved. The virginals were a particularly popular 16th century instrument amongst the elite, and Elizabeth was a natural. Sophie Yates is an expert on this particular instrument. She's agreed to teach me how to play. After all the piano lessons I had at Elizabeth's age, I have a feeling I'll be rather good at this.
Sophie, if I were learning the virginals like the Princess Elizabeth did, what sort of things would you have me do? Is it playing scales?
Well, yes, but importantly, with very different fingering to the sort we're used to nowadays. Because the keyboard of the virginals is so short, we didn't like using thumbs and little fingers because it pushes the hand too far up the keys. So you had to kind of walk up and down the keys with fingers 3 and 4 or 3 and 2, like this.
It starts with 2.
Yes.
2, 3, 2, 3, 2, 3. So it's like a little elf walking up
Yes.
and down with just his 2 feet.
Yes.
I do like the way, according to your technique, you've taken something as simple as playing a scale and you've made it insanely complicated. Sophie, tell me about your particular instrument.
Well, it's a copy of Queen Elizabeth's own instrument, and the original was made in Venice. And normally an instrument like this would have been inside an outer case, and the outer case would have been decorated. But unusually, because this was the Queen's instrument, the inner instrument had to be also beautifully decorated like this.
Why do you think such importance was placed on Elizabeth's musical education? Do you think this was the influence of her dad?
I think it was such an important accomplishment for any cultivated person. It was like being able to ride well or to fence. I mean, music was a really essential part of education.
So we can imagine all over England there are, well, quite well-off girls playing their own virginals in their own chambers.
Yes.
So Princess Elizabeth wasn't that different from other girls.
No, not in that way.
But she had the Rolls-Royce version.
As Princess Elizabeth progressed with her music, her 9-year-old brother Edward had no time for such frivolities. Because, as Henry's only son, Edward's education was preparing him to be king. So he was busy with proper lessons, like the latest theological teachings, which he took deadly seriously. In this picture of the Tudor royal family, commissioned by Henry in 1545, you can clearly see the pecking order. Unlike our conventional happy family group portraits today, you can tell at once who's Daddy's favourite. Yes, it's Edward, the golden boy, the chosen one, the male heir, bang in the middle. Edward's two older half-siblings, Mary and Elizabeth, have been shuffled off to the sides. They've been hidden behind screens of columns. They're clearly not part of the charmed inner circle. But what's particularly satisfying about this picture is that, in reality, the two women are just waiting in the wings. They're biding their time. Whatever their father may have planned for them, their day would come to take power. Edward had the weight of the kingdom on his young shoulders, not to mention the fate of his father's new church. His Protestant education was preparing him for all this. And when his father finally died in 1547, Edward's indoctrination was so thorough that he set about ridding the country of every last trace of Catholicism. Sir Dermot MacCulloch is an expert on the reign of Edward and the Protestant church he created.
Where did Edward get this passion for Protestantism from? Was it his own idea or was it his advisors?
A lot of senior politicians from Henry's reign, particularly the Archbishop of Canterbury, Thomas Cranmer, who by now is a really seasoned politician. He's been through the mill and he's determined to get a Protestant Reformation out of the little boy. He'd been Archbishop of Canterbury to Henry VIII, and he'd always been, from that moment, a Protestant. He'd wanted to introduce an English prayer book, an English liturgy for the whole of the service, and Henry had never allowed it, just a little bit. But now he could do the whole thing in English.
So what did Cranmer have to do then to get to the point of this new stripped-down Book of Common Prayer?
Well, you take all these, which is the old Latin liturgy, all the different bits of it, Sunday by Sunday, or even day by day. So you take all these books in Latin and you turn them into one book, which is this one, which is this one, the single Book of Common Prayer. He's a great scholar and he knows the liturgy very well. So what he can do is telescope all these into something which can be used all the time. And so what you need is, of course, a Holy Communion service, or the Mass as it had been, and then a service for the morning and a service for the evening. And the evening one, and a sort of a familiar term which wasn't actually a liturgical one, evensong.
So this, the Book of Common Prayer of 1549, is the first time we see evensong as a thing.
That's right. And here it is in the book. We can go through the book and an order for evensong throughout the year.
What musical possibilities were there then, if you were attending one of these new, exciting Protestant evensongs?
Well, quite a lot, actually, because you've got two big texts here from the New Testament. This is the Magnificat, my soul doth magnify the Lord, and this is the Nunc Dimittis, Lord, now lettest thou thy servant depart in peace. So you can sing those, or you could sing the 150 Psalms of David, the Psalter.
Yeah.
See, the Psalter or Psalms of David, pointed as it shall be sung in churches. So this book suggests you could sing this absolutely new stuff in church.
How would you sum up Edward VI's contribution to the history of music, then?
He gives you the words of the Book of Common Prayer. He wasn't an enthusiast for elaborate choral music. You can see that from the way in which things happened in his reign. Choirs were disbanded, organs were burnt, destroyed. So that's not the actions of a man who loves elaborate music.
My soul doth magnify the Lord.
In Edward's new church, choirs were seen as expensive luxuries, hotbeds of cunning men prone to drunkenness, vice, and contempt for their superiors.
For he hath regarded the lowliness of his handmaiden.
It was up to the Chapel Royal's resident Catholic, Thomas Tallis, to show people that music still had a place in this world. This is believed to be among his first settings for the new service of evensong.
When Elizabeth heard this music in her brother's Chapel Royal, she must have noticed how different it sounds. Tallis has pared down his style. It's austere. It's almost like a sermon in music.
Is on them that fear you, throughout all generations.
But it wasn't just the music that was changing. In this woodcut from John Foxe's Book of Martyrs, a wildly popular book of Protestant propaganda, it's clear to just what lengths Edward would go to enforce his new religion.
Dermot, what's happening with these poor old papists? Bad things are being done to them.
They're not having a good time. They are fleeing the country. And they're taking with them their trinkets, as this picture says. This is a terribly Protestant way of looking at it all. Triumphal, the end of papistry. Here you've got a monk with the papal mitre in his hand, taking that away onto shipboard. Of course, what that leaves you is this church up here, which is now pure. It's ready for Reformed worship. And it's even in this picture, you've got all the Reformed worship going on. So that's a nice sequence. Papists gone, Reformed church, that's how you do worship.
Edward and his advisors were transforming religion in England. It all looked and sounded starkly different to Catholicism.
Edward was building a brand new church, and this meant that all traces of the old one had to be destroyed. Rood screens were pulled down, walls were whitewashed, and stained glass was replaced with clear.
Suddenly, the way people had been worshipping for generations changed, from the top down, and they reacted ambivalently. One chorister, who was sympathetic to Edward's changes, wrote a musical guide to Cranmer's Book of Common Prayer. John Marbeck was trying to help worshippers who were confused about what and how to sing in this new church.
So here we are, you and I, we are Edwardian people. We want to do the right thing. What is Mr. Marbeck going to tell us to do in terms of singing in church?
Well, first of all, you're singing in English, of course. This is absolutely key. Before this time, the singing would be in Latin and would therefore be done by somebody who understood Latin. Now it can be done by the parish clerk, who is not an ordained man, but just an ordinary person. He can read and he can sing, but he's certainly not a priest.
What kind of music then does Marbeck want us to be singing?
So it's simple, and the whole point of it is that it is about delivering the word. The key theme of the Reformation is the word of God, delivered in a way that you can understand. So it's all about the language and putting the words across clearly.
I guess we can see, just sitting here in this church, that we're supposed to be interacting with the words, aren't we? Because there they are written on the walls for us.
Well, this beautiful church really sums up that process. There you have the chancel arch, and you can see little bits of what is clearly some sort of medieval wall painting behind there, which was whitewashed over to get rid of the saints, the idolatry, the worship of images, and instead you have the word, the Lord's Prayer, the 10 Commandments, written in black letters so that if you can read, there it is.
So, Mr. Parish Clerk, will you please show me what John Marbeck's Evensong was like?
So Marbeck's version, which is printed in the Book of Common Prayer noted, sounds like this. Lord, now lettest thou thy servant depart in peace, according to thy word.
So now I can see you really clearly and I can understand you. It's brilliant.
And the last of those is the important bit. You can hear the words and you can understand them.
Now, I think that King Edward VI wants me to do some psalm singing, doesn't he? I'm keen to do this.
Psalm singing in English was absolutely central to the music of the Reformation. It's a way that ordinary people can sing the word of God themselves. So here is what Marbeck gives us for psalms. Lord, rebuke me not in thine indignation.
Lord, rebuke me not in thine indignation.
Neither chasten me in thy displeasure.
Neither chasten me in thy displeasure.
Lord, now lettest thou thy servant...
In the early 1550s, Elizabeth could clearly see the future of the English church under her brother Edward's rule. It was a church radically different to the one of her childhood, one stripped of all ornamentation. But what she couldn't have seen coming was Edward's premature death, at the age of just 15, from tuberculosis. His religious revolution was abruptly stopped in its tracks, and as Elizabeth's Catholic sister Mary came to the throne, she must have anticipated a tremendous reversal.
Next in line came Mary. Here she is, with her very different agenda. She'd never said goodbye to Catholicism. She clung on to the religion of her childhood, just as she clung on to the memory of her mother, Catherine of Aragon, Henry VIII's first wife. As Queen, Mary would take the opportunity to send England back to the old faith. She expected everyone to fall in line, not least her younger sister, the Protestant Princess Elizabeth.
Henry's daughters had both inherited his stubborn nature. Mary wouldn't countenance anything short of complete conversion back to Catholicism, while Elizabeth refused to bend to her sister's will.
Elizabeth kept on disobeying Mary by failing to turn up for Mass, the service that was central to the Catholic faith. She came up with all sorts of ingenious excuses and get-outs and illnesses that she had. Eventually, Mary had had enough of this. She decided to send her sister to this place.
She accused Elizabeth of being involved in a Protestant plot and threw her in the Tower of London.
This was a really dark and dangerous moment for Elizabeth, imprisoned in the Tower by her own sister. Elizabeth's mother, Anne Boleyn, don't forget, had been executed here. Elizabeth didn't know when, or even if, she'd be allowed to leave.
She pleaded with Mary in a letter. I never practiced, counselled, nor consented to anything that might be prejudicial to your person or dangerous to the state. I humbly crave but one word of answer from yourself." But Mary didn't even respond to the letter, leaving Elizabeth to agonise over her fate.
With Elizabeth safely locked up, Mary set about restoring the Catholic Church of her childhood. She reversed the changes made by her brother, Edward. She vindicated the memory of her own mother, Catherine of Aragon. The fledgling service of Evensong was finished for now. It was back to the Catholic Mass of the old days, with all its elaborate, decorative, beautiful trappings.
In the Chapel Royal, Thomas Tallis, a lifelong Catholic, was now finally composing for a Catholic queen. So he returned to elaborate Latin polyphony. This one is for a very special occasion. Queen Mary had been trying for a baby, and at last she was pregnant. And her new husband, the most powerful Catholic ruler in Europe, Philip II of Spain, was planning to join her for a massive celebration at Christmas. The Catholic succession was assured. This was bad news for Elizabeth. With a Catholic line guaranteed, she would surely never rule. But yet again, a matter of health interrupted the flow of events, because by the end of July 1555, it was clear that there was no heir. Mary had had a phantom pregnancy, a devastating blow, and in fact, she was terminally ill. As time began to run out, Mary believed God demanded that she drive her Catholic counter-reformation even harder. Top of Mary's hit list was Archbishop Cranmer, the man responsible for Henry's divorce of her mother. Cranmer was sentenced to death by burning here at the University Church in Oxford in 1556.
So many people wanted to see Cranmer being tried that they built a platform just here to put him on. You can still see the mark of where it was in the stone of the pillar. For Mary, having Cranmer killed was both a retribution and a warning.
An undercurrent of violence flowed beneath the streets of Mary's England. 300 Protestants followed Cranmer to the stake for their heresy. Elizabeth would have seen that yet again religious belief was a matter of life and death. All the Tudor monarchs used violence to bring about religious change, but still, so many burnings in so few months was unprecedented. Then, in 1558, Elizabeth's sister, and now her enemy, finally died.
At last, it was Elizabeth's turn to reign. She'd outlived her two half-siblings. The question would now be, how was she going to heal the wounds of her divided country?
When Elizabeth was told she was queen, she'd said, "I am God's creature, ordained to obey his appointment." But was she going to enforce a fanatical form of religion like her two evangelical siblings? Under their sectarian regimes of the last 11 years, Elizabeth had witnessed two opposing versions of England. She understood what was at stake. During her coronation, she promised her subjects that "I will be as good unto you as ever a queen was to her people." But with bated breath, people wondered what kind of a queen would Elizabeth really be?
Within a year, it started to become clear what the answer was going to be. Elizabeth reinstated the more severe 1552 version of Cranmer's Book of Common Prayer. Her church was going to be Protestant, like her brothers. But when it came to music, well, that was different. She kept the music that Mary had liked. Music that Elizabeth herself loved and which she thought was central to worship. She even passed laws to protect music in church. For the comfort of such that delight in music, it could be played both at the start and the end of the service, both in the morning and the evening. And it was with this resurrection of evensong that Elizabeth's ideas about church music found their ultimate expression.
So Elizabeth's evensong opened up all kinds of musical possibilities, not least the playing of the church organ. Her brother Edward had ordered the destruction of this instrument, but Elizabeth encouraged its use because she thought its sound glorified God. She was determined to protect the organ, even knowing that this would antagonize hardline Protestants.
What did the Puritans have against organs? Is that because it's a particularly popish instrument?
They're often on rood lofts, they're often on rood screens, and that they stand there, as it were, detracting attention from the matter at hand. They're thought of as producing this high type of music that is difficult to engage with for people who want to engage with the Word of God.
So, Christian, how does your replica Tudor organ work?
Well, this reconstruction of a medieval organ works in the same way in which organs work now, actually. Air is produced at the back of the organ using the bellows.
With those big bellows around the back.
Indeed, and that feeds into a reservoir, which is below the soundboard here, and the pipes lie on the soundboard, and when you depress the key, that essentially opens a valve and allows air into the pipes.
But nothing's going to happen because we're not
Nothing
bellowing.
will happen now
we need to be bellowing first.
Indeed. Welcome to the Tudor gym, Lucy.
Do you call this a bench press? Is this what you do?
Shoulder press or something, I think.
Oh, it's quite hard.
Indeed, it is, yeah.
And then what? Do they just naturally...
They'll naturally go down,
come back?
and of course much more quickly when the organ's being played and the air is escaping through the pipes. And then, of course, you want one to be operated in alternation with the other. So when you release, just release quite gently, otherwise it does affect the
So
sound.
you never let them run out?
Never let them run out. But of course this is going very slowly because we haven't got any sound at the moment.
Well, get playing, get playing. I'll keep you full of wind.
Once we get into Elizabeth's reign, we start to see the organ used both as a solo instrument in a more virtuosic way, but also with voices. She, whilst of course requesting that the music be distinct and modest, and that the words be well understood, she also made provision for a hymn or an anthem at the end or the beginning of morning or evening prayer, so that those who enjoyed music could benefit. She also I think that the words used are that there should be no alteration to the assignment of living for those musicians who are employed in the church.
Oh, does that mean you keep your jobs, guys?
Exactly. Shall we play a Tudor duet?
Yes, let's be Elizabethan musicians who've been all pent up and we're raring to go.
Excellent.
Elizabeth insisted that she have the finest musicians in the land working in her chapel royal. So now the very elderly Thomas Tallis brought forward his young protege, the virtuosic organist and chorister William Byrd. Byrd was a Catholic, just like his teacher. But this didn't bother Elizabeth, because with these musicians at the helm, her chapel royal would enjoy its heyday. Just like her father before her, Elizabeth had a pretty flexible view of religion. And in her own private chapel, she reintroduced lots of old-fashioned practices. My colleague, Father Anthony Howe, is the current chaplain of Elizabeth I's Royal Chapel, still in use at Hampton Court to this day.
Father Anthony, tell me a bit about your fantastic outfit. What do you call this? Is it a cope?
Yes, it's called a cope, and it's a semicircular piece of cloth of gold in this case.
Let me see the back. Give us a twirl.
There's the back of it. The best
look
bit's
at that.
behind, actually, so you don't see my face, which is probably the best thing.
You look almost more splendid from the back than from the front.
I think that's the idea, because it was used in procession, so people
yeah.
saw behind, and the congregation would have seen all these glorious cope hoods, which is what that is called. But they would have all been richly embroidered, the whole lot of them. The English embroidery was so rich, and so it would have been a real sight for anyone seeing people wearing these things.
Now, is it the case that Elizabeth I particularly liked to see the members of her Chapel Royal looking splendid? She would have liked what you're wearing.
Yes, she did. We have a picture of Elizabeth's funeral procession where the gentlemen of the chapel are all wearing glorious copes. So the colour would have been enormous. It would be such a sight for everybody to see in the chapel.
All of this sounds a little bit Roman Catholic.
It was definitely High Church. High Church is a nickname, really, for churches with more advanced rituals, so they do more things, so you see more, taste more, smell more, hear more. She liked to see, hear and smell. She wanted the chapel to look glorious to the glory of God. She was very pious. It was distinctly not Roman Catholic. It was in English, and they made very clear. Nevertheless, there was a great reverence towards the sacraments, towards the worship. Everything was to be beautiful.
What did Elizabeth I particularly see in Evensong? How did she use it?
She used it to make music that was so special, that certainly glorified God, but also glorified the court as well. That was the important thing in Elizabeth's mind. She had to answer before God for her crown, but also glorified the monarchy, the Tudor monarchy, and glorified and made it important amongst the other monarchies in Europe.
So she did it for God, but actually it was quite good for herself too.
I think that's probably a fair assessment.
What went on here in Elizabeth's chapel wasn't just for her private enjoyment. She was also using music as a form of soft power.
Visitors from the continent, who'd heard rumours that England was full of dour Puritans, would have been surprised by Elizabeth's private chapel. During a visit in 1564, the Catholic French ambassador was particularly pleased. They seemed to be glad that we did not expel music out of our choirs, said Elizabeth's Archbishop.
So what Elizabeth did in her chapel set the template for Evensong. And it's amazing that it's pretty much unchanged to this day. But of course, the battles over religion didn't stop there. Some of the Puritans in Elizabeth's government thought that Evensong was nothing more than badly disguised Catholicism, trying to sneak in through the back door. They proposed the abolition of curious singing and the playing of organ in church. In 1563, their bill was defeated in Parliament by just one vote. That was a pretty close shave for Evensong.
This was a clear message to Elizabeth. There was fierce opposition to her so-called High Church, and they'd be watching her every move. But they needn't remind Elizabeth that it was strictly forbidden to practice the old faith, because, in public at least, she enforced the Puritan line. She caught Catholic priests and showed them no mercy. So devout Catholics, willing to risk their lives for their faith, held masses in secret. Among these worshippers was none other than darling of the Chapel Royal, William Byrd, who'd sung clandestine masses here at Ingatestone Hall with his Catholic patrons, the Petre family. With Byrd, Elizabeth was prepared to show just how flexible she could be when it came to religion.
In the 1590s, Byrd left the Chapel Royal and he moved here to rural Essex to be near other like-minded Catholic dissidents and hopefully out of earshot of the agents of the state. These Catholic masses, held in secret, were closely guarded affairs because if there was an unexpected knock at the door, well, your life could be in danger.
But as long as Byrd kept his Catholicism under the radar, Elizabeth was prepared to overlook his indiscretions. This special treatment reflected her desire to find a middle way when it came to religion. Unlike her siblings, she said she had no desire to open windows into men's souls, because for her, the English church music Byrd created had immeasurable value. So much so that in a letter he wrote to the new King James I after her death, Byrd boasted that he had enjoyed certain rights as a Catholic under Elizabeth and would like these to continue.
I think there's so much to admire about Elizabeth I. There's her courage, her pursuit of power in a world of men. And then there's her cleverness. She could outwit all of her courtiers. But she isn't cold, she's human. And one of the things that makes her human is her love of music. Not least out of all of her achievements is this gift that she's given us of choral evensong.
By bringing all the elements of choral evensong together, Elizabeth ensured its survival. And now, if I were to conjure up an English scene, it wouldn't be complete without the sound of a church choir. But this music is not just a relic, it's a living tradition.
O Lord, open thou our lips, and thou mouth shall show forth thy praise. O God, make speed to save us. O Lord, make haste.
This is Elizabeth's legacy. Because she fought for the comforting of such that delight in music, evensong still has new possibilities.
As it was in the beginning, is now, forever shall be
With Father Anthony and Carl, the current custodians of Elizabeth's Chapel Royal, we're witnessing how the story of evensong is still being told.
Praise ye the Lord.
I think Elizabeth I would approve.